Colleagues, Jackie Bailey.
Point of order, Presiding Officer. I waited till you returned to your place before doing so.
You,
and I apologise for not giving you notice, but I have been reflecting on the previous points of order by my colleague Neil Finlay. I appreciate how difficult this situation is for the corporate body, but it's been publicly reported that the Crown Office wrote to the Scottish Parliament last night threatening the Parliament with contempt of court action on the publication of Alex Salmond's evidence. Given that the Lord Advocate is in charge of the Crown Office and a member of the government, he should be invited to make an urgent statement to this Parliament. And given the significant public interest, will the Presiding Officer publish the letter from the Crown Office to the Parliament so we understand the restrictions placed on the corporate body?
Can I thank Jackie Bailey for the point of order. And can I first of all say that I recognise the frustration that members express and feel across the chamber. I am aware that most members will not be aware of the full context of this matter, because it is a matter of great confidentiality. Therefore, I will not comment on it specifically. However, I will certainly bear the request for an urgent statement in mind, and I will consult with colleagues on the Bureau. And I believe I've also had a request for an urgent question, which I'll also have a chance to consider later. Thank you very much, colleagues. We're going to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 24196 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Heat Networks Bill. Colleagues, we're just going to have a slight pause. I think we were all set up to move that motion, but the point of order possibly disrupted matters. Just a slight pause. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm going to call on the Minister for Parliament, Graham Day, on behalf of the Bureau, to move the timetable motion 24196, setting out a timetable for Stage 3 consideration of the Heat Networks Bill.
Forgive my forgetfulness. Moved.
Thank you very much. No members indicated they would speak against the motion. Are we agreed? Sorry, the question is that motion 24196 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, the next item of business is Stage 3 proceedings on the Heat Networks Scotland Bill. So, in dealing with amendments, members should have with them the bill as amended at Stage 2, the marshalled list and the grouping of amendments. As usual, the division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for 5 minutes for the first division of the afternoon, and there will be a 1-minute vote on any division. Members who wish to speak in the debate on any group of motions should press the request to speak buttons as soon as I call the group. And we'll now turn to the marshalled list. So, on Group 1, can I call Amendment 5 in the name of the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse, in a group on its own? Minister, to move and speak to Amendment 5.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Part 1 of the bill creates a licensing system for those who are supplying thermal energy by means of a heat network. This is crucial as it will ensure that those who are supplying the essential service of heat, and in some cases hot water, via a heat network are solvent, skilled and fit and proper persons. It will also provide for the imposition of conditions of a licence so that networks are developed and maintained to the highest standards. As such, Section 2 of the bill makes it an offence to supply thermal energy via a heat network without a licence. On reflection, however, I believe that it would be appropriate to insert a reasonable excuse defence for this offence, and this is what Amendment 5 would do. In allowing for a defence of reasonable excuse, we would ensure that, for example, we're not penalising persons in the event that a company reorganisation inadvertently means that the licence is no longer in the name of the company supplying heat. There may be other cases where a specific set of circumstances mean that an offence is unintentionally committed. It would, of course, be for the courts to determine what is a reasonable excuse for supplying thermal energy by a heat network without a licence. At this stage, however, I trust that members agree that rather than creating a strict liability offence, it is proportionate to allow a defence to be made where it can be shown that the person in question has a reasonable excuse. I move Amendment 5.
Thank you, Minister. And no other member has indicated they wish to contribute. I take it the Minister has nothing further to add. So the question is that Amendment 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Group 2? This is on the Just Transition Principles. Can I call Amendment 3 in the name of Claudia Beamish, grouped with Amendment 4? Claudia Beamish to move Amendment 3 and speak to both amendments in this group. Sorry, is it Mr Rowley instead of Claudia Beamish? I beg your pardon, I should have. Mr Rowley, Alec Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This group of amendments seeks to embed the Just Transition Principles throughout the bill. The two amendments refer to Just Transition Principles as set out in Section 35C of the Climate Change Act. These describe the importance of equity and action taken to reduce net Scottish emissions of greenhouse gases, and in short require that this is done in a way that supports sustainable jobs, low carbon investment and infrastructure, engages with workers, trade unions, communities and others, creates decent and high valued work and contributes to sustainable economic approaches which help to address inequality and poverty. Amendment 2 adds to Section 5.3 and 4 of the bill, which provides that the licensing authority may only grant a licence application if it is satisfied that the applicant has the ability to perform the licence activities and requires the licensing authority to have regard to certain matters so far as relevant in making this assessment. The amendment adds to these the applicant's ability to operate a heat network in a manner that takes account of the Just Transition Principles. Amendment 3 adds to Section 76A on the Heat Networks Delivery Plan. The amendment would require the Just Transition Principles to be considered by Scottish ministers when preparing, reviewing and revising the Heat Networks Delivery Plan and when reporting to Parliament on the plan. By embedding the Just Transition into these stages at the heart of the network development, it ensures that the benefits of these networks will not come at the expense of equity and, in fact, all the multi-benefits and opportunities for local people can be seized. The shortcomings of capturing fair work in the renewable industry have been clear to see, so getting these principles into the face of the bill is meaningful. Claudia Beamish appreciated being able to refine these amendments in discussions with the Minister Paul Wheelhouse between stages 2 and 3. Securing the just transition remains the key goal of Claudia Beamish and indeed the Labour Party in Scotland. Every step on the journey to a net zero emissions economy should be tested against these principles of equity. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. And can I call the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In 2019, the Climate Change Scotland Act was amended to enshrine in law our commitment to transitioning to net zero in line with the Just Transition Principles. Those principles set out the importance of taking action to reduce net Scottish emissions of greenhouse gases in a way which supports sustainable jobs, low carbon investment, develops and maintains social consensus, creates fair and high value work and contributes to sustainable economic approaches that help to address inequality and poverty, as Mr Rowley has set out. Our commitment to these principles is unwavering, and the Just Transition Principles are at the heart of our green recovery towards a fairer, greener, more prosperous Scotland. So it's right that in lodging Amendments 3 and 4, Claudia Beamish asked Parliament to consider how the principles may be applied to the development of the heat network sector. I note that in its interim report, the Just Transition Commission highlighted a heat network in Aberdeen as a good example of what's possible when equity is considered alongside the need to reduce emissions. So I'm happy to support Ms Beamish's amendments, having discussed this with Ms Beamish prior to and since stage 2, as Mr Rowley has set out, and would ask members to also support them. So that these principles inform the licensing system and as we plan for the long-term and large-scale delivery of heat networks across Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. And can I ask Mr Rowley if he has any further comments to add?
That's fine.
In that case, we'll move straight to the vote, and the question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And we turn now to Group 3. This is on standards of service by licence holders. Can I call Amendment 50 in the name of Alexander Burnett in a group on its own? Alexander to move and speak to Amendment 50.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. My amendment in this group and the subsequent one relate to clarity and guidance for licence holders, the points of which are on the record during stage 2, so I see no reason to no need to repeat them now. They weren't pressed at that stage to improve on the definitions, to make them compatible with the rest of the bill, and I'm grateful to the Minister and his team for assisting me in achieving that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Wheelhouse. And I call the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me start again by thanking Alexander Burnett for positive engagement on this matter. As he indicated at stage 2, as a general principle, we have tried to avoid putting standard conditions on the face of the bill. The main reason for that is that need to retain flexibility and ensure that whoever the licensing authority is in the future, they have the ability to shape the licence conditions as required. However, I do recognise the desire to have a reference to standards of service being specified on the face of the bill, and the amendment lodged by Mr Burnett will ensure that standards of service are clearly set out as a matter which the standard conditions may make provision for. So I'm happy to support Mr Burnett's amendments, as I trust this clarity will help developers, and I would encourage colleagues across the chamber to also support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does Mr Burnett wish to add any comments? Thank you very much. We'll go straight to the question. The question is that Amendment 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. Turning now to Group 4. This is on guidance to licensing authority. Can I call Amendment 1 in the name of Maurice Golden, grouped with Amendments 2 and 51? Maurice Golden to move Amendment 1 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you. I'd like to move Amendment 1. I'd like to thank the Minister and his officials for working with me on this amendment and Amendment 2. The bill currently provides that Scottish ministers may issue guidance to the licensing authority about the exercise of its functions under Part 1. Subsection 2 provides that the guidance may in particular relate to matters in Section 5(4), which concern matters for the licensing authority to have regard to in assessing an applicant's ability to perform activities that would be authorised by the licence. The proposed amendments would specify that the guidance may also in particular relate to how functions of the licensing authority should be fulfilled in relation to the supply of thermal energy by means of existing heat networks. In terms of these provisions, ministers may give the licensing authority guidance about the way in which their functions in relation to the licensing of the supply of thermal energy by existing heat networks should be carried out. These functions include how applications for licences are to be considered and the nature of both standard conditions and other conditions which may be imposed, excluded or modified. The guidance would be able to define what is considered to be an existing heat network for the purpose of such guidance. The licensing authority must have regard to any guidance issued. Any guidance issued would also be published. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. And could I call Alexander Burnett to speak to Amendment 51 and the other amendments in this group? No comments to make. That's fine. Could I, in that case, call the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Maurice Golden and Alexander Burnett for working with me since stage 2 to introduce these amendments today. Turning firstly to Mr Golden's amendments, which concern the important matter about how the implementation of this bill would affect existing heat networks, of which we estimate there are around 1,080 across Scotland. I know that those operating schemes today are eager to know, for example, whether they would have to obtain a licence and what might happen should such an application be refused. The Competition and Markets Authority has been clear that regulation of the heat network sector is required, and the licensing regime in the bill will also provide the mechanism for decarbonising this sector. At this stage, I cannot provide the concrete guarantees that existing operators and developers seek about how they will be affected by the bill. However, I can assure them that we will work with them as we develop secondary legislation to put in place the full regulatory framework provided for in this bill to ensure that the system is proportionate and that impacts are properly understood and mitigated as appropriate. There are mechanisms already in the bill which allow exemptions to be made under Section 3 from the requirement to hold a heat network's licence, the ability to apply licence conditions or special conditions to only certain licences under Sections 6 and 8, and for application fees to be modified in Section 77. These provisions provide the flexibility required to implement appropriate transitional arrangements or to create exceptions if it's considered appropriate. Mr Golden's Amendments 1 and 2 provide further reassurance to operators of existing heat networks by specifying in primary legislation that guidance issued to the licensing authority may include guidance on how the licensing authority are to exercise their functions in relation to existing heat networks. This is a welcome and proportionate change to the bill, and I am happy to offer my support for these amendments, and I ask members to do the same. Turning now to Mr Burnett's amendment, I believe we are seeing the, the benefit of having a member who's experienced in the development and operation of heat networks take part in the bill. It's one of the strengths of the Parliament, presiding officer. We have lots of experience across the chamber. And I understand that clarity is needed on how licensing authority is to reach its decisions and the expectations that operators can have about their dialogue with the licensing authority. So Amendment 51 recognises that guidance is the most appropriate place to deal with these issues. So again, I am happy to support this approach and again ask members to support Mr Burnett's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Does Mr Golden wish to add anything by way of conclusion? Thank you. So we'll go straight to the vote. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 2, Maurice Golden, to move?
Moved.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 51, Alexander Burnett, to move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 51 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. Turning to Group 5 now, this is on minor and technical amendments. Can I call Amendment 6 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendment 7, 54, 44, 47 and 48. Minister, to move Amendment 6 and speak to all the amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This group, as you say, deals with very minor drafting amendments, and I would therefore keep my comments as brief as they can be in describing them. Firstly, as a result of amendments at Stage 2, Section 17 of the Bill contains sub-paragraphs A and B, and we want to adjust that. Amendment 6 will therefore change paragraph A of Subsection 2 into Subsection 2 itself, and Amendment 7 will change paragraph B of Subsection 2 into a new Subsection 3. Amendments 47 and 48 are consequential on Amendments 6 and 7. They change the cross-references in subsections 1 and 2 of Section 83 to the definitions in Section 17. Amendment 54 takes account of an amendment that was passed at Stage 2, which enabled local authorities to become consent authorities. At that time, a consequential amendment was made to Section 77, subsection 1, that enabled provision to be made about the recovery of administrative costs by local authorities. It's also necessary to modify Section 77, subsection 4, to clarify that local authorities do not have to consider heat network consent applications where any applicable fee has not been paid. Finally, Presiding Officer, an amendment was also passed at Stage 2 to insert a new Section 61B about compensation that may be paid in the event that a network wayleave right is varied. This was done in recognition that a licence holder may, in future, need to modify the right that it is secured, which could in turn give rise to the need to compensate the landowner or occupier. The detailed provisions about the payment of any compensation is to be made by regulations. Amendment 44 would modify Section 81 to provide that any regulations about the payment of this compensation under subsection 4 of Section 61B are subject to the affirmative procedure. This would provide consistency with the procedure to be used for other regulations about compensation throughout the bill. So I move Amendment 6 and I urge members to support the other amendments in the group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And there are no other colleagues who wish to speak in this group, so we'll go straight to the vote. The question is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we agreed? We are agreed. I call Amendment 7, Minister, to move formally.
Formally move to convene.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. We're turning to Group 6 now, Local Authority as Heat Network Consent Authority. Can I call Amendment 8 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 8A, 9, 10, 43 and 46. Minister, to move Amendment 8 and speak to all the amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The role of local authorities in the regulatory system for heat networks, particularly in granting consent to the development and operation of networks, has been a major theme during the passage of the bill. When we first consulted on a heat network consent system, we recognised that local authorities may be well placed to take on this function, given that they already act as planning authorities and because heat networks are local assets by their nature. However, as we further developed our proposals, it became clear that heat networks would not be developed uniformly across Scotland, meaning some, potentially many, local authorities would be required to invest in a function that went underutilised. Instead, we sought to maximise use of the capacity and expertise already available within the Scottish Government's Energy Consents Unit, which already scrutinises renewables and electricity transmission projects. As such, the bill, as introduced, placed the responsibility for administering heat network consents on the Scottish Ministers. Following constructive Stage 1 debate, however, I agreed with the Energy, Economy and Fair Work Committee's recommendation in its Stage 1 report that the bill should be amended to include provision so that responsibility for consents could move to local authorities in the future. With the committee's support, amendments were passed at stage 2 that enable those local authorities who wish to be empowered with this responsibility to become a consent authority, while ensuring that the Scottish Government can carry this function out elsewhere in Scotland where necessary. I've kept in touch with committee members on this issue since stage 2, in particular Andy Whiteman, and have come to a consensus that part 2 of the bill could be refined further so as to empower local authorities to take on the role of the consent authority. Amendment 8 therefore amends section 18A to provide that if a local authority makes a written request to Scottish ministers to become the consent authority for its area, the Scottish ministers are then required to make the necessary regulations within 6 months. Presiding Officer, Mr Whiteman has also lodged an amendment of Amendment 8. Amendment 8A rightly recognises that having made a written request under Amendment 8 to become the consent authority for its area, a local authority may later change its mind and decide that it does not wish to become the consent authority. Mr Whiteman's amendment provides for this and recognises that where a local authority withdraws its written request, the Scottish ministers are no longer required to make regulations under section 18A, subsection 1 in relation to that local authority. And I'm happy to support Mr Whiteman's Amendment 8A. Amendment 9 replaces the existing subsection 3 of section 18A with an identical obligation to consult the affected local authority and any other appropriate person before making regulations under subsection 1. The drafting is adjusted in light of Amendment 43, which will alter the parliamentary procedure. Amendment 10 is a technical amendment setting out that where the regulations are subject to the affirmative procedure, as they textually amend the Act, the references in the section to the making of regulations is to be read as references to laying draft regulations before this Parliament. Given that Amendment 8 would empower local authorities to request to be designated as the consent authority for its area, Amendment 43 removes those designation regulations from the list of powers which are always subject to the affirmative procedure. So regulations designating a local authority as a consent authority for its area would be subject to the negative procedure unless the designation regulations add to, omit or remove text from an Act. In that case, Amendment 46 provides for regulations to be subject to the affirmative procedure. So I move Amendment 8. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And could I call Andy Whiteman to move Amendment 8A and speak to all the amendments in this group?
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. I move Amendment 8A. Since the bill was introduced, I have sought to strengthen the powers of local government in it. It is ironic that a bill whose drafting was influenced by the Danish experience should have had so little role for local government, given that Denmark's municipalities, much smaller units of local government than ours, have exclusive jurisdiction over the consenting regime and also play a significant role, together with cooperatives, in the ownership of the pipe network. The committee's Stage 1 report noted this, and I was pleased that the Minister introduced amendments to allow for the transfer of powers to local government by regulation. I lodged amendments at Stage 2 that would have given a clear timescale to this, and I'm grateful for Graham Simpson for having spoken to them, myself having had to be in attendance at another committee at that same moment. But quite rightly, he did not press them on my behalf, given that the Minister committed to work with me at Stage 3. And so I wish to thank the Minister for his constructive engagement, welcome the amendments in his name in this group, particularly Amendment 8, which gives local authorities the right, the statutory right, to request and be granted consenting rights. And this is an elegant solution, I think, and one that reflects that not all local authorities will want these powers at the same time. My Amendment 8A is minor but important, and as the Minister said himself, it ensures that where a request is made under the provisions of Amendment 8, a local authority can withdraw that request should circumstances change from the date upon which the request was made. It covers, therefore, an unlikely scenario, but provides additional flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Whiteman. And can I ask if the Minister wishes to add any further comments? We'll go straight to the vote. The question is that Amendment 8A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Minister, to press or withdraw Amendment 8 as amended.
Formally moved.
Thank you. So the question is that Amendment 8 as amended be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. Can I call Amendment 9 in the name of the Minister? Minister to move.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 10, Minister to move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. We move now to Group 7. This is on heat network consent enforcement. Can I call Amendment 11 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and 19. Minister to move Amendment 11 and speak to all the amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. These amendments that I've lodged in this group are largely technical in nature, but do provide important clarity about the enforcement action in relation to heat network consents. Amendment 11 modifies Section 30, so it's clear that the Enforcement Authority is able to issue an enforcement notice to both persons who are constructing or operating a heat network on their own behalf without consent, and persons who are constructing or operating a heat network on behalf of another without that other person holding a heat network consent. Separately, the current provision of Section 30, subsection 1b, which allows enforcement action to be taken against a consent holder where there is a failure to comply with a condition or limitation of the consent, becomes, with some minor modifications, the new subsection 1a. Amendment 12 is then a technical amendment which is consequential to Amendment 11. It simplifies Section 30, subsection 4a, by providing that an enforcement notice must set out the reasons why the Enforcement Authority has issued it. Amendments 13 and 14 are minor amendments which reflect the changes to Section 17 made at Stage 2. They simplify paragraphs A and B of subsection 5 of Section 30 to refer to compliance with or failure to comply with Section 17, subsection 1. Section 17, subsection 1, as amended at Stage 2, now includes both an obligation to hold a heat network licence and an obligation to comply with conditions or limitations of a consent. Amendment 15 removes Section 30, subsection 8, which is no longer applicable, given the changes to be made by Amendment 11. Amendment 16 provides a definition of enforcement notice in Section 30 for the purposes of Part 2 of the Bill, and as a result, it's no longer necessary to provide this definition within Section 36, and an Amendment 19 therefore removes that section. Amendment 18 alters Section 33, subsection 3, to provide persons with a further defence against the offence of non-compliance with an enforcement notice, namely the defence of reasonable excuse, for failing to ensure the taking of steps or the cessation of activities specified in the notice. Amendment 17 is a technical change to signify new paragraphing of the existing text of Section 33, subsection 3, in consequence of Amendment 18. Presiding Officer, I move Amendment 11 and I urge members to support the other amendments in this group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And no other members indicated they wish to speak, so we'll go straight to the question. The question is that Amendment 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendments 12 to 19 and invite the Minister to move the amendments on block?
Moved on block, President.
Thank you. Does any member object if I put a single question on Amendments 12 to 19? No. Good. In that case, the question is that Amendments 12 to 19 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. We turn now to Group 8. This is on heat network zoning by local authorities. Can I call Amendment 20 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 and 28. Minister, to move Amendment 20 and speak to all the amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I apologise in advance. This is one of my longer contributions. I will keep my remarks in this group as brief as I can do, mainly relating to amendments lodged by Mark Ruskell, which I have discussed with Mr Ruskell. To start with, I would like to highlight that heat network zoning is probably one of the highest priority measures for stakeholders. This legislation is the first of its kind in the United Kingdom, and we already know that stakeholders such as the Association for Decentralised Energy are calling on the UK Government to go in the same direction as we have set out in Scotland. That is because it will bring certainty to local heat planning and empowers local authorities to ensure that heat network opportunities are visible to potential investors and to local communities as well. Presiding Officer, heat network zoning by local authorities, as introduced under this bill, refers to two aspects: a duty on local authorities to review heat network zoning in their area under Section 38, and a power to designate such zones under Section 37. Amendment 20 that I have brought forward is a technical amendment to clarify that a local authority may exercise its power under Section 37, subsection 1, to designate an area as a heat network zone at any time without having to carry out a review under Section 38 beforehand. I felt that making this small change recognises that those local authorities who have a good picture of opportunities within their area may move directly to the final designation of the zones without having to carry out a review under Section 38 first. It also complements the amendments that have been introduced by Mark Ruskell that I would like to now turn to. Firstly, let me thank Mr Ruskell for positive engagement ahead of Stage 3. I'm grateful for that. I understand that the underlying intention of his amendments is to maximise instances where heat network zones are designated, which will in turn help grow the sector. Without going into too much detail, Amendment 21 would oblige local authorities to carry out a review under Section 38, subsection 1, to consider whether one or more areas in its area is likely to be particularly suitable for the construction and operation of a heat network. Amendment 23 would strengthen the provisions in relation to the next steps to be taken by a local authority following the carrying out of such a review. The amendment provides that should this review find that an area is likely to be particularly suitable for the construction and operation of a heat network, then the local authority may either proceed to consider itself whether to designate the area or areas as a heat network zone, or alternatively request that Scottish ministers consider whether to designate the area or areas as a heat network zone. Amendment 24 would remove the option of doing nothing following review as currently specified in section 38, subsection 3b. So I believe this strengthens action to deliver heat networks. In carrying out reviews to determine whether an area is likely to be particularly suitable for the construction and operation of a heat network, Amendment 22 requires local authorities to consider the matters mentioned in section 39, subsection 1, including, for example, fuel poverty. Amendment 28 enables the Scottish ministers to issue guidance to local authorities about reviews carried out under section 38, subsection 1, which could include a definition of what is understood by, and I quote, particularly suitable for the construction and operation of a heat network, unquote. Amendment 25 relates to the statement that a local authority must publish following the heat network zoning review. It specifies that what such statements must set out, which includes setting out reasons for the outcomes of the review, identifying an area by reference to a map where it's considered to be suitable for designation as a heat network zone, and providing reasons for the local authority's decision to either proceed to consider designation itself or referring the matter to the Scottish ministers to consider designation. Amendment 26 makes a minor drafting change to the list of additional matters relating to reviews that may be specified by Scottish ministers in consequence, Amendment 25. Presiding Officer, at stage 2, I highlighted my concern that Mark Ruskell's original amendments in this area would remove the degree of choice for local authorities following the first step of the review. However, I am now content that with all of the proposed amendments and confirm that they work within the wider context of the bill, the degree of choice is retained by maintaining the option to request Scottish ministers to undertake the designation on behalf of a local authority. And having discussed this approach with Mark Ruskell, I'm happy to support his amendments as they will ensure the heat network zones are being designated where there is a clear opportunity identified. Heat network zones, as I mentioned before, are a key piece of the puzzle which unlocks other elements of this bill, such as heat network zone permits that are aimed at increasing deployment of this technology across Scotland. They also provide a useful reference point for other policy areas such as building standards, planning and non-domestic rates that can be used to further drive connections to heat networks within heat network zones. Making sure that these heat network zones are designated at the earliest opportunity will unlock all these opportunities and give us a better picture of the potential for this technology to help us on our journey to net zero. Presiding Officer, Mark Ruskell's amendments have been developed constructively and collaboratively and strengthen the bill and will have a real impact on deployment in Scotland. So I am happy to support each of his amendments in this group and encourage other members to do the same. So I move Amendment 20 in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And can I call Mark Ruskell to speak to Amendment 21 and the other amendments in this group?
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Happy to do so. And can I certainly acknowledge the creative and constructive discussion with the Minister and the Bill team in between Stage 2 and Stage 3. And I think the amendments that are presented here today are the outcome of that. I won't go into all the detail of the amendments. I think the Minister's already done that. But what I will say is that, all stakeholders need a really clear signal that areas that have been assessed as particularly suitable for the construction of a heat network will not be unduly held back in that designation. And I think it was commented in evidence that I read at Stage 1 that we don't want a situation where there are lots and lots of really positive feasibility studies being produced about heat networks, but there's actually very little action happening on the ground. So the work to designate heat network zones that are suitable must progress. And if local authorities are not in a position to drive that forward themselves, then under my amendments, they have the clear option to request ministers to do so instead. But, holding back on designation when areas have been assessed as suitable should not really be an option. And under my amendments in this grouping, they won't be. So can I thank the Minister again for constructive engagement with this and hope that the Chamber will vote for these.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. So we'll go straight to the first question. The question is that Amendment 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 21 in the name of Mark Ruskell to move?
Moved.
Thank you. So the question is that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 22, Mark Ruskell to move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. Are we agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 23? Mark Ruskell to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 23 be agreed to. Are we agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 24? Mark Ruskell to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 24 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Can I call Amendment 25 and Mark Ruskell to move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 25 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 26? Mark Ruskell to move.
Moved.
Moved. I'm ahead of myself. The question is that Amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. We are all agreed. And we turn now to Group 9, Targets and Reporting. Can I call Amendment 27 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 37, 38, 39, 40, 52, 41, 42, 53, 45, 55 and 49. Minister, to move Amendment 27 and speak to all the amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And again, I apologise, this is one of the more lengthy contributions. At stage 2 of this bill was amended to include new provisions in relation to the heat network supply targets by Mark Ruskell and Maurice Golden. Maurice Golden also inserted provision requiring Scottish ministers to produce a heat networks delivery plan relating to the increased deployment and use of heat networks. In essence, these amendments aim to provide clear signalling to the market that it's due to develop further following the establishment of regulatory framework under this bill, and to make the Scottish ministers more accountable for the delivery of the overall aim of this bill to achieve the greater deployment of heat networks in Scotland. Although I had some reservations in relation to the evidence used to produce some of the targets, having discussed this matter with members, I am happy to embrace the challenge that statutory targets in relation to heat network deployment bring. And we've always had the ambition, of course, for heat networks to deploy more significantly in Scotland, and indeed targets would make that more certain, I believe. To ensure that the bill is clear in this matter, it's necessary to reconcile the provisions on heat network supply targets and the heat networks delivery plan. And that's why, Presiding Officer, I brought forward a number of amendments that will help achieve this. Amendment 27 is a consequential on various amendments in this group and adjusts a reference to heat network targets in section 39. Amendments 37, 38, 39 and 42 relate to reporting requirements in the heat networks delivery plan in section 76A. Amendment 37 ties the reporting requirements in relation to heat network supply targets with the heat networks delivery plan by providing that the plan sets out how the Scottish ministers propose to meet the targets specified in section 76C, subsection 1. We felt that the alignment of the reporting requirements that both had 2 yearly reporting cycles and were required to be laid before Parliament would optimise use of parliamentary time and provide a fuller picture on the state of the heat network sector to Parliament. Amendment 38 further provides that any report laid before the Scottish Parliament by the Scottish ministers following a review of the heat networks delivery plan must consider what progress has been made in meeting the targets specified in section 76C, subsection 1. Amendment 42 removes subsections 2 to 4 of section 76C, which relate to the delivery plan and reporting requirements regarding targets, as these will now be covered in section 76A. Amendment 39 moves section 76A itself so that it follows section 76C, which relates to the heat network supply targets. And amendments 40 and 41 essentially combine the existing sections 76B and 76C, which both relate to the targets, into a single section, but with some modifications. Amendment 40 leaves out section 76B. Amendment 41 inserts 2 regulation-making powers in section 76C, which are akin to the powers in section 76B. The first follows the Scottish ministers, allows the Scottish ministers to specify by regulations an additional target relating to the supply of thermal energy by heat networks in Scotland, but also to modify any target for the time being specified in section 76C, subsection 1. The second power allows the Scottish ministers by regulations to make provision about targets specified or modified under that power. And Amendment 45 provides that regulations specifying additional targets or which modify existing targets are subject to the affirmative procedure. Amendment 49 is technical and makes a change to the long title to properly reflect that the bill also sets targets relating to the supply of thermal energy by heat networks and the delivery plan relating to the increased use of heat networks. Presiding Officer, we feel that these changes were necessary to tidy up provisions of the bill following stage 2. Additionally, Scottish ministers taking the power to amend the targets as set out on the face of the bill will ensure that once there is better evidence through the upcoming National Comprehensive Assessment and designation of heat network zones, future administrations will be able to update these targets if required by regulation with the full scrutiny of Parliament in doing so. We have good reasons to believe the potential for heat networks in Scotland is substantial and that these powers will be used to ensure we are ambitious. Presiding Officer, other amendments in this group have been lodged by Maurice Golden and Mark Ruskell, who engaged very constructively with me and my officials prior to stage 3. And without preempting their input to this discussion, I would like to thank them for these constructive contributions and offer a few comments. Firstly, I would like to turn to Amendment 52, brought forward by Maurice Golden, to adjust the target for combined supply of thermal energy by heat networks in Scotland to reach 2 terawatt-hours of output by 2025. So the target is instead to reach 2.6 terawatt-hours of output by 2027. The regulatory system that we put in place by this bill provides the structure for growth of the market to ensure that heat networks in Scotland are developed in appropriate places to a high standard, provide low and zero carbon heat to end users and provide high levels of service. We anticipate that this system will be operational from 2023 and therefore a target to be achieved by 2025 could carry a risk that a rapid deployment of heat networks needed to meet it would result in heat networks developed to poor standards in inappropriate places and with no controls in place to ensure that they are low or zero carbon. The target proposed by Maurice Golden of 2.6 terawatt-hours of output by 2077 has arisen from discussions with himself and Mr Ruskell and allows more time for the regulatory system to bed in and ensure that the supply chain develops to deliver this important challenge. It's by no means less ambitious, and I want to stress that. In fact, Presiding Officer, Scotland currently has approximately 34,000 homes connected to heat networks that, alongside non-domestic connections, amount to 1.2 terawatt-hours of existing supply. To demonstrate the scale of the challenge, we estimate that if the deployment was linear, the equivalent of 20,000 homes will need to be connected to a heat network every year from 2021 to achieve the 2027 target set out by this new amendment. To put it into further context, the Queen's Quay heat network in Clydebank, which currently supplies a health centre and a care home with heat generated from the River Clyde, hopes in time to expand to connect approximately 1,000 homes and 500,000 square feet of commercial space. The heat network at Queen's Quay is one of the most ambitious in Scotland and has taken 5 years from concept to operation. Heat networks are large-scale infrastructure projects, and as such they take time to plan, to develop and commission. Maurice Golden's amendment will provide more time and space to identify and develop appropriate sited low or zero carbon heat networks, and as such it is very welcome. Amendments 53 and 55, introduced by Mark Ruskell, are another welcome addition to the bill that further strengthens it as we seek to achieve our 2045 net zero target. It places a duty on Scottish ministers to lay regulations by October 2023 that set an additional target relating to the output from the combined supply of thermal energy by heat networks in Scotland to be reached by 2035, and such regulations will be subject to the affirmative procedure. Not only does this enable the Scottish ministers to take account of best evidence provided by initial heat network zoning, but it will also enable a clear pathway into the future, giving longer-term certainty to local supply chains and driving innovation to identify and deliver further opportunities in the sector. Together with a strengthened heat network zones framework, this long-term target will provide a strong signal to investors and the supply chain that Scotland is a good place for their business. To sum up, Presiding Officer, I'd like to encourage members to vote for all the amendments in this group as they provide an ambitious but balanced commitment. They signal that Scotland is serious about its commitment to providing low and zero carbon heating to our buildings, and I move Amendment 27 in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And can I call Maurice Golden to speak to Amendment 52 and the other amendments in this group?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This Amendment 52 seeks to update Amendment 155 from Stage 2. It will introduce a clearly defined delivery target for 2027 of 2.6 terawatt-hours. And we know decarbonising heat will be a big step in reaching net zero in Scotland. And one of the stated aims of the bill is to develop the low-carbon heat networks needed to do that. But without delivery targets, we have no way of assessing the pace or quality of development taking place. That is why the target cited in the amendment follows research from Scottish Renewables, and it is broadly in line with industry growth estimates. They represent a more than doubling of output from current levels by 2027, and they will allow us to ensure we are on track and that heat is playing its part in reaching our 2045 net zero goal. I welcome other amendments in this group and look forward to Scotland achieving these ambitious targets.
Thank you very much, Mr Golden. And can I call on Mark Ruskell to speak to Amendment 53 and the other amendments in this group?
Yeah, thanks, Presiding Officer. Happy to speak to 53 and others. I mean, again, I think, constructive discussions in between stage 2 and stage 3, and I think taken together, the amendments in this group will set a much better framework for target setting going forward. I think we all acknowledge that targets are important. We've seen that in relation to renewable electricity, but they can also be prone to either overshooting or undershooting if they don't have a solid technical basis behind them. So I think, the terawatt-hours targets that were inserted by Maurice Golden's amendment stage 2 were very welcome. But the 2025 target perhaps didn't fully align with the tools that the bill will make available to deliver in that timescale. And I think, the Minister's already mentioned perhaps what could have been an unintended consequence to that, which is that heat networks get built quickly, but they're connected to gas. So we have another dash for gas, and that wouldn't be great in terms of carbon. So I think the 2027 target that's amended here, although it's 2 years later, it does match the same trajectory as the 2025 and the 2030 targets. And it does set a really clear and achievable medium-term goal for the industry. So I think it's the right approach. In terms of my own amendments, at the other end of the scale, there's a danger that we don't set targets far enough into the future to deliver that long-term certainty needed for investment. So setting a clear expectation in this bill that there will be a robust 2035 target for heat networks, I think is really important. And I think just sort of thinking back to some of the work we're doing in the Environment Committee at the moment on the Climate Change Plan update, we can see in the current Climate Change Plan that there is a flatlining of ambition as we head towards 2030 in a number of the sectors. And I think where bottom-up targets can be set within sectors like this, that will put more solid blocks of ambition into the full climate change plan when that comes up for a full review in 2023. So I think it's important in terms of drive, where we've got certainty, let's build that into the climate change plan that we can be ambitious and build from there. And October 23 is the date in my Amendment 53 here. That's the date to set the target for 2035. So it will come at a good time when we'll be looking at the climate change plan in its entirety. And it means that that 2035 target will be set on the back of a national comprehensive assessment that will draw together all the detailed work on heat zones that will be coming from the councils. It will deliver that certainty in a robust, and I hope a very ambitious way going forward as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. Does the Minister wish to add any comments?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move straight to the vote. The question is that Amendment 27 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 28, Mark Ruskell, to move? This was the previous group.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. We're turning now to Group 10. Heat network permits, requirement for permit and enforcement. Can I call Amendment 29 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 30, 31, 32, 33 and 34. Minister, to move Amendment 29 and speak to all the amendments in this group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The amendments I've lodged in this group are largely technical matters that have been identified by us following review of the bill after stage 2. Firstly, a notice under Section 47, Subsection 1, prohibits, unless an exemption applies, the operation of a heat network within the heat network zone designated by the notice, without a heat network zone permit for that zone. Amendment 29 modifies Section 47, Subsection 1 in order to ensure that those operating a heat network on behalf of a heat network permit holder may do so without themselves having to hold a permit as well. Amendment 30 places the exemptions from the prohibition into Section 47. These exemptions are essentially those currently within the criminal offence provision in Section 51. The exemption from the need to hold a heat network zone permit to operate a heat network within a designated zone apply in terms of new subsections 1A and 1B if a person is entitled to operate the heat network immediately before the zone is designated by a notice under Section 47, Subsection 1. This means that where at the time of designating a zone a person already holds consent to operate the heat network or is exempt from the need to hold a consent, then they are to be exempt from the requirement to hold a heat network zone permit in order to operate the heat network. Amendment 31 is a consequential amendment and simply provides that a heat network zone permit is defined as one issued by the permit authority. Amendment 32 replaces the existing subsections 1 to 3 of Section 51 as the exemptions they contain are now moved to Section 47 by Amendment 30 that I described earlier. New subsections 1 and 1A provide that a person who operates a heat network without holding a heat network zone permit in contravention of a notice which prohibits that operation commits an offence if they do so either on their own behalf or engaging another to do so on their behalf. The amendment also allows for a defence of reasonable excuse against these offences, similar to the provision under Amendment 5 in relation to licences. Amendment 33 is a consequential amendment on Amendment 32 to ensure that the penalty for the offence of operating a heat network in a designated zone without a permit applies whether a person is operating the heat network on their own behalf or another person is acting for them. Finally, Amendment 34 is also consequential to Amendment 32. It removes the definition of a term which is no longer required in light of the drafting changes. So, Presiding Officer, I move Amendment 29 and I urge members to support each of the technical amendments in this group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that Amendment 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendments 30 to 34 and invite the Minister to move the amendments en bloc?
Moved en bloc.
Thank you very much. Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 30 to 34? No. So the question is that Amendments 30 to 34 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. We're going to turn now to Group 11. This is on compulsory purchase Crown land. Can I call Amendment 35 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendment 36? Minister to move Amendment 35 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to have the opportunity... Oh, sorry, I've skipped ahead of myself, Presiding Officer. Never a good start. We're going so fast. The amendments I've introduced in this group provide how compulsory purchase powers conferred on heat network licence holders under Section 57 may be exercised in relation to Her Majesty's private estates. Section 80 of the Bill already makes provision about the powers of entry onto Crown land as a result of the powers under Sections 34, subsection 2, Section 64, subsection 5 and Section 65, subsection 7. On reflection, I believe it's appropriate that similar provision is made regarding how compulsory purchase powers are to apply to the Queen's private estates. Amendment 35 therefore prohibits the Scottish Ministers from confirming a compulsory purchase order prompted under Section 57 unless the, and I quote, appropriate authority, unquote, consents. The appropriate authority is defined for these purposes as in Section 80 of the Bill. Subject to the consent of the appropriate authority, the amendment continues to permit the use of compulsory purchase order to assemble land for the construction or operation of a heat network. Amendment 36 proceeds to define what is meant by both Her Majesty's private estates and an appropriate authority. Given the technological nature of heat networks, which are dependent on a density of heat demand being adjacent to a source of thermal energy, it's not anticipated that the exercise of compulsory purchase powers in relation to the Queen's private estates will be a common occurrence. Nevertheless, given that licence holders will often be private enterprises rather than public authorities to whom compulsory purchase powers are typically provided, I believe it's appropriate that there is further provision about their application in relation to Her Majesty's private land. So I move Amendment 35 and urge members to support both amendments in this group.
Thank you very much. And I call Andy Whiteman.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I oppose both Amendments 35 and 36. Prior to 1862, the monarch was prohibited from owning land in their personal capacity, and the 1862 Act was only passed following the death of Prince Albert to legitimise and allow the private ownership of land in Scotland by the monarch. I have no objection to the Queen in her private capacity owning property, but she cannot, on the one hand, claim rights as a private citizen to private estates, and on the other, to continue to be exempt from the rules which govern the affairs of all other private citizens who own land, most particularly in this respect, the risk that, in the public interest, some of your land may be subject to a compulsory purchase order. Presiding Officer, it's long past time that the Crown Private Estates Act 1862 was repealed, and until that day arrives, we should not be seeking to make any exemptions for Her Majesty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr Whiteman, can I call on the Minister if he wishes to make a response?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll keep this brief. I do understand members' concerns around these amendments. However, we have taken care to make it clear that the approach taken in particular to this bill and not an acceptance of a general principle, since it relates to specific nature of heat networks and business models that they often adopt. It's not considered that a precedent is set, and our understanding is that other equivalent provisions have been included before I do hear what Mr Whiteman is saying, of course, but other provisions have been included before in other acts of the Scottish Parliament. For example, Section 100, Subsection 4 and Subsection 5 of the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act 2012 excluded Her Majesty's private estate and indeed other Crown land from compulsory purchase. As previously said, powers of compulsory purchase are more usually conferred on public bodies or bodies with a community purpose, as the compulsory acquisition of land must be in the public interest. Heat network development is likely to be taken forward by the construction of both large and small-scale heat networks. Licence holders therefore cannot necessarily be directly compared with public utilities which provide other services such as gas, electricity or water, and in practice it's probable that many licence holders will be companies created as special purpose vehicles to operate particular heat networks. So we think in these circumstances this amendment is, or set of amendments are required to ensure that we have smooth passage of the bill.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move to the question, and the question is that Amendment 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. So we're going to move to a division. Now, this is the first division of the afternoon, so I'm going to suspend proceedings for 5 minutes to call members to the chamber and to allow members online to register as well. So Parliament is suspended for 5 minutes. Thank you, colleagues. We are now back in session. So just to remind members, we're at Group 11, compulsory purchase of Crown land, and the question is that Amendment 35 be agreed to. Members may cast their votes now on Amendment 35. This will be a 1-minute division. That vote is now closed. Please let me know if you have had any difficulty in voting, and I call Rosanna Cunningham to make a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't access the Vote Parliament site at all. I would have voted yes.
Rosanna Cunningham, you would have voted yes. Thank you very much. I will make sure that is added, your vote is added to the register. Thank you. Thank you very much. The result of the vote on amendment number 35 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse is yes 108, no 6. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. Can I invite the Minister to move amendment 36?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The question is that amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I invite the Minister to move amendment 37?
Formally moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I invite the Minister to move Amendment 38?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 38 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. We've got a number of amendments now which were all debated in previous groups. Can I call Amendment 4? This was in the name of Claudia Beamish, but could I invite Alec Rowley to move?
I move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 39 in the name of the Minister? Minister to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 39 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 40 in the name of the Minister? Minister to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 40 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 52 in the name of Maurice Golden? Maurice Golden to move.
Moved.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 41 in the name of the Minister? Minister to move.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 41 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 42? Minister to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 42 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 53 in the name of Mark Ruskell? Mark Ruskell to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 53 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendments 54, 43, 44 and 45, all in the name of the Minister, and invite the Minister to move the amendments on block?
Moved on block, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Does any member object if we take the question on these amendments 54, 43, 45, 54, 43, 44 and 45 on block? No one objects. So the question is that amendments 54, 43, 44 and 45 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 55 in the name of Mark Ruskell? Mark Ruskell to move.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 55 be agreed to. Are we agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendments 46, 47, 48 and 49 and invite the Minister to move the amendments en bloc?
Moved en bloc, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 46 to 49 en bloc? No. The question is that Amendments 46 to 49 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. And that concludes consideration of amendments. At this stage, members will be aware, at this point I have to, I'm required understanding orders to decide whether or not, in my view, any provision of the bill relates to a protected subject matter, that is, whether it modifies the electoral system and franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in my view, no provision of the Heat Networks Bill does. Therefore, it does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. So in a few seconds, we'll be moving on to the next item of business, but we'll just take a short pause.
Thank you. Next item of business is a debate on motion 24192 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse and the Heat Network Scotland Bill. Before I invite Michael Matheson to open the debate, I call on the Cabinet Secretary to signify Crown consent to the bill.
Presiding Officer, for the purposes of Rule 9.11 of the Standing Orders, I wish to advise the Parliament that Her Majesty, having been informed of the purport of the Heat Network Scotland Bill, has consented to place her prerogative and interests, so far as they are affected by the bill, at the disposal of the Parliament for the purposes of the bill.
Thank you very much. And invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Paul Wheelhouse, Minister, to speak to and move the motion, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to address the Chamber today on the Heat Network Scotland Bill. I'm also delighted we've reached this stage after many years of preparation and indeed extensive stakeholder engagement. But before I talk about the bill itself, I think it's important to contextualise the work we're doing here. Because complex though it is, the bill is crucial to Scotland's response to the global climate emergency. The way we heat our buildings in Scotland currently accounts for around 21% of Scotland's total greenhouse gas emissions, and this is the third largest source of emissions across the economy. But it is a particularly challenging area to address, and as the committee recognised at stage 1, public awareness is key in the transition to renewable heating. Indeed, recent research found that many members of the public simply do not associate the incumbent fossil fuel heating systems with climate change. And the scourge of fuel poverty notwithstanding, the natural gas which serves a great majority of our buildings is comparatively low cost when compared with renewable heating. However, we cannot tolerate the status quo any longer. We urgently need to transformational change. And as part of the draft heat and building strategy which the Scottish Government published earlier this month, we set out our ambition to move 1 million homes to renewable and low carbon heating by 2030. Presiding Officer, Heat Networks will have a strong role, perhaps the predominant role, to play in achieving this. And currently, as mentioned earlier, only an estimated 34,000 homes are connected to heat networks. So we know that growth in the sector is going to have to accelerate significantly over the next few years, and that, in essence, is why we need this bill. Presiding Officer, in simple terms, a heat network is a distribution system of insulated pipes that carry hot water or steam from a central source and deliver it to our homes and businesses. Heat networks are generally more efficient than individual gas boilers and can be run from a wide range of renewable and low-carbon sources, including large-scale heat pumps, which extract heat from our rivers, or even waste heat recovered from industrial processes. And in the right circumstances, they also provide average fuel savings of 17% for households. They also have health and safety benefits, as there's no need for any combustion to take place inside the building with a consequential carbon monoxide risk. And as heat networks are long-lived assets, they create long-term local jobs in their maintenance and administration. The overall aim of this bill, then, is to accelerate the development of heat networks in Scotland, in turn driving down emissions and tackling fuel poverty. Firstly, it seeks to increase public confidence in heat networks by creating a new licensing regime to ensure operators are solvent, fit and proper, as well as driving up standards across the sector. The bill also introduces a new consenting system to ensure that new networks are developed where they will have the most benefit and are tailored to the needs of an area. The bill would also put in place arrangements to protect network users by enabling a transfer of operational rights to occur to ensure sustained supply. And secondly, it supports the commercial case for new heat networks by reducing the cost of construction and levelling the playing field with other utilities through creation of new rights for heat network developers and operators, as well as identifying the most optimal zones for heat networks and awarding these for development through a competitive process. I want to emphasise the positive, constructive role that the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee and other members have had in the process of strengthening this bill. I believe that because of this input, the bill is stronger and better than it would otherwise have been. And that input is responsible for the new provisions in the bill introduced at Stage 2, such as clear targets for the supply of heat via heat networks, which serve to provide a clear signal to investors and supply chains about Scotland's intent in this sector, regardless of the composition of future government administrations. The publication of a heat networks delivery plan, which will set out how the Scottish Government intends to meet these targets and which will be subject to the scrutiny of Parliament. I welcome these additions and have supported them, as well as those enabling responsibility for the award of heat network consents to be transferred to local authorities in the future. I'm also grateful to the members who proposed these amendments for their pragmatism and flexibility, particularly regarding the setting of targets. And I would also like to acknowledge the constructive discussions I have had with members around ensuring connections of buildings. I'd like to particularly acknowledge the input that Teach the Future has made in relation to the connection of educational buildings to heat networks, a point raised by Liam MacArthur at Stage 2. And I agree that this could unlock even more investment. And while we have not made specific provision in the bill to this end, our heat and building strategy has committed to detailed consultation on this matter for a wide range of non-domestic buildings, not only the educational estate. Returning for a moment to the issue of fuel poverty, this has rightly been raised by several members during the journey of this bill. I'd like to reiterate that ensuring this bill contributes to the eradication of fuel poverty has been and continues to be an absolute priority for the Scottish Government. And for that reason, and following feedback from the committee at Stage 1, I have ensured that the consideration of fuel poverty is embedded throughout the regulatory framework. Should the bill pass today, as I hope it will, we will continue to engage with fuel poverty stakeholders to ensure that we reflect their priorities as we move to implement the necessary regulations. The stronger provisions now included around community engagement will also help in this regard, and I would reiterate that we envisage working with Citizens Advice Scotland in developing these regulations should the bill pass today. Presiding Officer, I would like to emphasise that the Heat Network Scotland Bill, as it now stands, is a product of a significant team effort across Government and Parliament, and I look forward to hearing the views of members this afternoon. I'm particularly grateful to my Bill team, Presiding Officer, who have done an exceptional job, I think, throughout. I think that has been acknowledged by members across this chamber. And for many of them, unknown to many colleagues, it's their first bill. So I congratulate them on an exceptional effort. I'm also very grateful to all colleagues who have, and parliamentary staff and stakeholders for helping us to put this bill together. And I believe the bill is stronger for their contribution. I hope they are proud of the fact we have reached the stage we have today. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I believe the bill is a very important step in providing Scotland with the warmer, greener and more efficient buildings that we need to combat climate change, tackle fuel poverty and to live healthier and more comfortable lives. So I move that the Parliament agrees that the Heat Network Scotland Bill be passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now calling Alexander Burnett to open the Conservatives. Mr Burnett, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And before I begin, I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognise the hard work that has gone into this bill from our clerks and researchers, as well as the external stakeholders who have contributed to help strengthen this bill. I'd also like to thank the Minister for his collaborative approach to the bill. And whilst it was fortunately never one that was going to be politically contentious, I believe it has demonstrated that this Parliament is on occasion able to show a more positive side of politics. I also note members to my register of interest, and as I stated in the Stage 1 debate, I started developing heat networks back in 2004. So it has been a long wait, I can assure you, for legislative recognition of the sector. And my naivety at the time in thinking that successive Scottish governments since then would move quickly to match rhetoric with action has certainly been replaced by the cynicism of experience. However, the principle of this bill is to encourage greater use of heat networks, and it's a welcome one. And I hope, when passed, will encourage the development of heat networks. Because Scotland's performance has been woeful in hitting only half of its heat targets produced by renewables. And we also welcome the elements addressing consumer protection and the wish of both the committee and the Minister to use Ofgem, seen as the Rolls-Royce of regulation in an emerging market. We've also no issue with the many technical definitions. However, even now with the bill due to pass, I'm afraid there are still reservations, many of which are understandable given the physical complexity of heat networks. And there will be even more responsibility on ministers to get it right, given the route of secondary legislation that most of the enactment of this bill will occur through. And I certainly agree with the Ombudsman, who flagged the consideration that needs to be given to heat network customers during the drafting of regulations and the guidance that will be needed to enact the bill. So like them, we look forward to playing our part in that process too. Now, the main area of concern raised previously was that of the existing schemes to which the legislation will not apply could account for between 20,000 and 30,000 consumers. And as an aside, the failure to be able to identify that number accurately is also a concern I've raised several times. And it still seems to be a large discrepancy and a large number to be overlooked by any bill. Now, the Minister has said previously, and we accept, that existing schemes will be covered by proposed UK legislation. However, there is concern about whether they will be covered in the same way as this bill will cover them, and what will happen until such UK legislation is passed. Now, furthermore, many schemes are also continuing to modify and expand, and it remains unclear as when such modifications or expansions are considered significant enough to fall under this new licensing regime. So this could still give rise to the situation where existing parts of a scheme not covered by this bill will have to interact with parts of a scheme that will now be covered by future UK legislation as yet unpassed, a situation that I still do not see resolved in the bill as it stands. Now, there are a couple of other points too. On the supplier of last resort, the Minister has heard my concerns and pointed me to various parts of the bill previously. And I think we will now have to accept that we don't know how that will actually work in practice until it is required, which I would suggest is not an ideal way of operating. I've also raised specifically the problems of designating heat zones, both for operators sizing equipment and for building users being forced to join a monopoly supplier, irrespective of their heat demands. We've also raised previously the significant issue of how local authorities will resource their new heat zoning obligations with funding and the specialist skills needed. There are only a couple of companies with mechanical service skills who carry this out in Scotland, yet local authorities will be expected to have this knowledge almost overnight. The resource needed to create heat zones and decide where buildings can be realistically connected is incredibly complex, and I hope the amendments to address that will work in practice. Now, similarly, we've raised questions previously around the revocation or refusal of a licence, the transfer of assets process, the value and compensation mechanisms, and the lack of appeals process. The concern, unfortunately, remains there is not the technical and practical knowledge within the Scottish Government, and it's far from satisfactory, but we'll have to accept that this detail will come through secondary legislation, and we will hope to see further knowledge, the knowledge base improved. So in conclusion, we will welcome the bill and we will support it at decision time. And whether it will achieve a final amendment of the Minister today to see the increased use of heat networks remains in doubt. I sincerely hope that the Parliament will not be debating why there has not been growth in the heat network sector in another 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Burnett. I now call Alec Rowley to open for Labour. Mr Rowley, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be opening for Labour today in this debate. I'm glad that this bill will introduce a regulatory and licensing system for district and communal heating. This is something that we have repeatedly called for and supported. It surely makes sense that heat network consumers should be afforded the same service standards and protections as consumers of gas and electricity markets. But I am also glad to see this bill has been strengthened in scope through the various stages of amendments, and I hope this bill can be used as a good starting point for the expansion of heat networks and the benefits in return for all here in Scotland. I'm pleased to see a delivery plan and target in the bill, especially given the fact that we have seen the successes of district heating schemes across Europe and around the world, and the opportunities these schemes have created. I'm sure these successes are something we all hope and will work towards happening here in Scotland. Heat networks can use a variety of heat sources which have varying degrees of carbon intensity. They are often more efficient than individual fossil fuel heating systems and can also be fully run from renewables, recovered waste or surplus heat sources. Given we have a target to reduce Scotland's emissions of all greenhouse gases to net zero by 2045, heat networks will surely have a role to play in achieving that. I note that the briefing from the WWF for this debate, that they highlight the fact that currently a quarter of emissions come from buildings, and changing the way we heat our homes will be a key part of the drive towards net zero. Heat networks also represent an economic opportunity to support thousands of jobs in construction, which will be a key part of a just transition and green recovery, I would hope. One of the major takeaways from this should be that this is an opportunity to create jobs and local supply chains here in Scotland for the Scottish manufacturing sector. The Scottish Government Climate Change Plan update states that investment in heat networks will, and I quote, provide high-quality, sustainable green jobs across Scotland's towns and cities, such as in specialist design, architecture, equipment, manufacturing, civil engineering and maintenance. This is very much an opportunity and one I hope the Government managed to deliver on. As I said only a few weeks ago in this chamber during the debate on the green recovery, if we are to focus on establishing a greener economy, we must absolutely prioritise the development of skills and jobs. But the assurances needed from the Scottish Government is to commit to ensuring those jobs are created here in Scotland, not shipped overseas, and that adequate funding is put in place to realise the potential from a massive expansion of heat networks here in Scotland. The Scottish Government have said that around 50% of homes and non-domestic buildings will need to be converted to a low or zero carbon heating system by 2030. Heat networks will obviously play a key role in meeting that target, and where we can, we will support the Government in their attempts to deliver on that commitment. As WWF state, to reach the scale of output needed, there will need to be a quick ramping up of action supported by increased capital funding. This is action that can be taken now, and I welcome further outlining from the Government on how it will deliver on training and apprenticeships to develop the new and updated skills that are needed to fully meet the aims of this bill once it has become law. Presiding Officer, the Government and through the Government Minister have worked across the party on this. I think there is a real commitment to make this happen, and I'm delighted that we are progressing to agree this bill today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. I now call Liam MacArthur to open for the Liberal Democrats. Mr MacArthur, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and likewise I'm very grateful for the chance to speak briefly in this Stage 3 debate on an important piece of legislation that Scottish Liberal Democrats will be delighted to support. I'm proud of the role my party has played in helping Scotland set stretching emissions reduction targets. Equally, though, I'm determined we now walk the talk in meeting those targets. Being no doubt, a 75% cut in emissions by 2030 is significant and challenging. It can only be achieved, however, if we pick up the pace in areas such as heat, where, as others have pointed out, progress to date has been glacially slow. Over the next decade, we need to build confidence in the technologies required to make a difference, and that's why this legislation on regulating heat networks is an essential first step. It's also why the case for developing strong customer protection is so compelling, and why further legislation in this area will be necessary, as the Ombudsman and others have pointed out. At stage one, I noted the very constructive engagement between the committee and the Minister, and I'm pleased that things appear to have continued very much in a similar vein since then. One benefit has been the willingness to extend the powers of local authorities and communities to take a lead where there's a desire to do so. Amendments passed at stage two and again today mean the challenge of decarbonising heat can be met from the ground up. As Orkney's MSP, I'm certain the islands will be ready, willing and able to step up to that challenge. From the recent visit, committee members will appreciate that Orkney has an impressive track record when it comes to turning concepts into practice, innovation into action. But as the statistics released today remind us, that has not sheltered islanders from the harsh reality of fuel poverty, higher in Orkney than anywhere else in Scotland. Orkney has 4 times the national average of homes in the lowest energy efficient category. Shameful levels of fuel poverty and extreme fuel poverty mean the revolution in heating technology can't come soon enough for my constituents. It underlines why Energy Action Scotland is right to press the government to do more in its budget, but also I think highlights why this bill must have in mind the importance of bearing down on fuel poverty. Making energy use more sustainable means making it more affordable to those who currently have to choose between heating and eating. Finally, I want to thank the Minister again for the way he has sought to take on board proposals from opposition members across the Chamber. At stage 2, I lodged amendments aimed at increasing our ambition to decarbonise the school estate. This was built on the inspiring Teach the Future campaign. They argued that, and I quote, if our education system is to teach students about sustainability, the buildings they learn within must be sustainable. While I understand the technical reasons behind the government's reluctance to include such an ambition on the face of the bill, I very much welcome the Minister's assurances that this aspiration will now influence the work that follows the passing of this bill, and I'm also particularly grateful to him for paying specific tribute to Teach the Future in his opening remarks. Young people have shown what's needed to take responsibility for our environmental obligations. The Scottish Government and this Parliament must take heed. And on that note, I confirm once again that Scottish Liberal Democrats will be happy to support this bill at decision time today, and express my thanks to all those who've played their part in what has clearly been a productive and genuinely collaborative process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, can I remind members taking part in the debate they should remain in the chamber for opening speeches, particularly pertinent if you're closing for your party in the debate. Now call on Mark Ruskell, please, to open for the Green Party.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I say that, as a member coming to this bill, certainly in its later stages, can I thank the committee for its very detailed Stage 1 report, which certainly made a lot of the intricacies of this bill a lot easier to catch up with at Stage 2. And, can I also thank again the Minister and the bill team. It's interesting, this is the bill team's first bill, hopefully there will be more to come, for constructively engaging throughout this process. And also, can I thank stakeholders, including WWF and Scottish Renewables, for their detailed input, most helpful, I think, in terms of constructing amendments. And I think, the committee was right to underline that we do face an energy quadrilemma: climate, affordability, security of supply, and acceptability of energy supply. And I think, the latter three would have been certainly big drivers for the Danes when they began their huge development of municipal heat networks back in the 1970s. But today's climate emergency hugely raises the stakes for everyone, and with serious question marks over whether hydrogen will be a practical low-carbon replacement for gas, it's right that we build as many resilient, low-carbon heat networks as possible today. So, this is quite a technical bill, and certainly more of the regulatory and licensing framework has been fleshed out as it's been progressing through Parliament. And I think at this point, having as much of that clarity as possible on the face of the bill is going to lead to more certainty. And that will lead to heat networks becoming more bankable as investors can more accurately weigh up the risk and the opportunity. Although, as Alexander Burnett has already alluded to, there'll still be more detail to come. But I think this bill has gone as far as it can in terms of placing that on the face of the bill. So I hope there's enough of an incentive in this bill and the accompanying heat and building strategy to ensure that no low-hanging fruit is missed in the years to come. But it is infuriating, though, to see in my own region, for example, a distillery, it's very local to me, dumping vast amounts of heat into the sky when its immediate neighbours sit in fuel poverty next to their open coal fires. We can't miss these opportunities going forward. And heat network zones must spell out the clear win-win opportunities with costs to be borne if the owners of anchor buildings decide to sit out on the sidelines and create inertia. The opportunities are crying out. I mean, this very building itself has probably gone about as far as it can go in terms of substantially reducing carbon emissions. But the introduction of a heat network for the Canongate would be a real game changer, And the future-proofing has to start now. We've got major housing growth areas that need heat networks built in from day -1, not day 0. Developers must not be allowed to choose the short-termism of the gas grid. And the Scottish Government has a responsibility to not send mixed messages about the future of fossil gas for heating. So, Presiding Officer, this bill hopefully heralds a new chapter in Scotland's energy story. It builds on the experience and expertise of those who pioneered district heating in Scotland and across Europe. And it is time to make another big step change for a greener and fair energy system. And that's why the Greens will be supporting this bill tonight. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. Open debate. I call Willie Coffey to be followed by Gordon Lyndhurst. Mr Coffey, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The aim of the bill is quite simple: to encourage greater use of local heat networks in Scotland and thereby move away from burning gas and fossil fuels to heat our homes and our buildings, and to provide the supporting legislation and licensing and regulation to bind it all together. At the moment, over half of Scotland's higher energy consumption is used creating heat, and over 80% of our homes burn gas to heat our gas central heating systems. Estimates say that only about 1% of Scotland's heat demand is met by district and local heat networks, while across in Denmark, as has been mentioned by one or two members, it's about 50%. In Copenhagen, an incredible 98% of all buildings are connected to a heat network. Denmark started off its journey a lot earlier than Scotland for a number of reasons, but these figures illustrate both the challenge that we face but the gains to be made in terms of our contribution towards reducing CO2 emissions. We will be the first amongst the countries in the UK to legislate in the development of heat networks and to help us meet our net zero by 2040 target, and also to help us tackle fuel poverty, a helpful addition to the bill at stage 2 requested by members of the committee. The future of gas grids needs to be clarified by the UK government, but in the meantime, we can make good progress in Scotland using the powers that we have, and this bill, if approved, will help us achieve that. The proposals in the bill stem from recommendations coming from an expert group of industry, consumer groups and local government, and lines up pretty well with advice from the Committee on Climate Change too. The bill, Presiding Officer, marks the beginning of a transformational change which paves the way for Scotland to create the supportive market environment that will be needed to expand the development of heat networks across the country. Let's also recognise the potential for new businesses to emerge and provide jobs to support the industry, and the Scottish Government is determined to unlock the potential for that sector wherever possible. Presiding Officer, we mentioned Denmark a lot during our committee's work, and rightly so. We heard evidence from the Danish Energy Agency that heat networks cover about 2/3 of all households in Denmark and represents about 17% of their national energy consumption. It's probably stating the obvious, but heat networks are adaptable to whatever new technology develops. The technology delivering the heat isn't within the household or the building, and so any changes to that technology, for example, if hydrogen emerges as a solution, don't affect the house at all. The ability to create local companies and local jobs is also clear, and the skills needed transfer quite easily from the natural gas sector. Here in my constituency, we have a number of examples. Our Halo project, which is under construction in Kilmarnock, £63 million urban village, which will be the first net zero carbon energy project in Scotland, providing jobs, economic growth, skills development, access to employment opportunities, clean energy and housing. And our soon-to-be refurbished St Sophia's Primary School in Galston will be 100% supplied by air source heat pump technology, and overall it will reduce its energy consumption by about 80% compared to normal. Presiding Officer, in summary, passing this bill at stage 3 will set Scotland off in yet another positive direction towards meeting our net zero aspirations. It's important that we do this carefully, with all due consideration being given to drafting up all the regulations and licensing arrangements, opening up opportunities for local businesses and hopefully co-ops too, to emerge, to exploit the potential of it, and probably most importantly of all, to take the public along with us on that journey to net zero. I'm happy to support the bill at stage 3 and look forward to it being approved at decision time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Coffey. I call Gordon Lyndhurst to be followed by Sarah Boyack. Ms Boyack is the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Lyndhurst, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. These measures to tackle Scotland's move to zero carbon by the middle of this century will no doubt be welcomed across this chamber. When this bill came before Parliament at stage 1, I noted that modern district heating systems were pioneered in New York in 1877, where Birds Hill Hawley noticed the abundance of thermal energy in towns and cities and realised it could be repurposed, piped into homes and so to meet public demand. A case study of initiative and the free market making lives comfortable with minimal additional impact on our environment. The question may arise, why has it taken so long over the past almost century and a half for the idea to catch on here? But it is reassuring to know that a similar idea has finally caught on and seems to be at the centre of this proposed legislation, which must be implemented by action. There is the undesirable possibility that regulated and licensed energy and heating networks could lead to rising prices, a proportionate or rather disproportionate impact on the least well-off. This is what we do not need. An excellent Great Britain-wide framework demonstrating the benefits of our great union is what we do need. A single British regulator, Ofgem, may be able to ensure matters proceed in an organised fashion to the benefit of us all. Effective solutions are what are needed. Now, the bill's narrow purpose conceals a vast number of policy areas, which include efficiency, climate targets, and land rights. I am pleased to see, for example, amendments which will require developer engagement with local communities before seeking consent for new developments. Local consultation is a good thing in instances where government action can cause significant disruption. Indeed, communities should be at the heart of this bill's operation. At stage 2, Citizens Advice Scotland described its aims as admirable, but cited troubling cases of those who have had their heat turned off after accruing arrears. Now, the Scottish Conservatives called for the expansion of district heating in our manifesto 5 years ago and these networks in 2017. The SNP and government have often missed their own loudly hailed targets. Accepting that this is a quadrilemma for us all, that is a dilemma for us all, let us hope the commitments that this bill sets out do not disappear in the mists of future time. And with these words, I shall close at this stage with my and my party's support for the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr Lyndhurst. I call Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, I think we've had a really constructive discussion over this bill. We're now living in a climate emergency and we need to take steps across all sectors to reduce our carbon emissions. So the provisions in this bill are critical. New heat networks will require both strategic thinking and a lot of detailed work, and building in the opportunities that new technologies will deliver in the years to come. So it's vital that our infrastructure is future-proofed, is affordable to those who use it and rely on it, and works for all. And heat networks are a key net zero infrastructure. And as Alec Rowley said, They bring us a big opportunity in Scotland to invest in local jobs with apprenticeships, roles in designing, building and installing projects which can be spread right across the country. It's vital that they help us tackle fuel poverty and enable the green recovery we urgently need to deliver those good quality, long-term employment and training opportunities for our communities. Heat networks are also vital infrastructure in terms of our national climate targets. But alongside that, I think maximising local decision making is going to be critical. And there's a need for leadership at the Scottish Government level and the local government level. So the Scottish Government needs to use its leadership to support information exchange, to work with local authorities, ensure they have the funding to lead on planning and implementation to make these goals a reality, but crucially, as we discussed at our committee last week, to help de-risk projects. That was the key message that came across from witnesses. My amendment to the non-domestic rates bill enabled infrastructure that contributes to our net zero goals to be exempt from NDRs, or at least have them significantly reduced. My colleagues' previous Labour Council leadership in Glasgow led the way for heat networks to be developed, only for them to be hit with the prospect of huge NDR bills that made them work totally unworkable. But the work in Glasgow is an excellent example of anchor institutions working together, the Council and Strathclyde University, that is enabling driving ahead on innovation in the city. And I think we need to see that replicated right across Scotland. So I'm really delighted that tomorrow at our local government committee, we're going to be looking at the SI on non-domestic rates and heat networks. I do think that's really good progress. Quite a few colleagues today have mentioned Denmark. I can say I went to Denmark as a minister 20 years ago. They were miles ahead of us then. We are still miles behind, but we can learn from them. They were particularly focusing on heat networks that actively encourage municipal, local ownership and planning, and close cooperation with local industries and businesses. And we need the same kind of leadership here together, so that we maximise the benefit of local investment, so that community-owned networks gets recycled back into our communities, and community wealth building being built in from the start. Given the growing demands on local government budgets and resources, it is critical that we get the right support to our local authorities, and the in-house knowledge and experience is needing to be developed right across the country, given the pressures they're under. So I do see the issue of leadership from the next Scottish Government as being absolutely critical, from ministers taking the political lead to support authorities, whether it's finance, policy and technological support and experience exchanges, but it's also about local authorities beginning to take their leadership role, planning ahead successfully. So it's both sets of governments working together and in conjunction with the UK government, so that everybody is aligned to deliver. This is a key issue that we need to do. If we're going to be successful here, and climate emergency demands that we are successful, supporting our communities, seeing Scottish manufacturing, we need people to work together, we need the incentives and the support. And we need to make sure that whoever's going to be here in 20 years' time, they're not talking about missed opportunities and they need to catch up. We've now got good examples in the UK, in Denmark, and actually, yes, in Scotland as well. So let's learn from them, let's get going, and let's make sure this legislation actually makes a real difference and we get the low-carbon investment that our country urgently needs. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Boyce. I now call Alec Rowley to close for Labour. Mr Rowley, please.
Presiding Officer, thank you. And this has been a really good debate, and I would want again to pay tribute to the Minister, Paul Wheelhouse, for the way that he has engaged with other parties across this Parliament. It is the way to do legislation, and I think the evidence of that was the way that the amendments went through today in record time. So I'm grateful. I'm also grateful to the Bill team, and the Minister rightly thanked his Bill team for all the work that they have put into what is a very important piece of legislation. I was interested that Mr Wheelhouse talked about the need to get buy-in and for communities to buy in. And you know, I've experienced that. My first experience of a district heating system was many years ago when I first visited Lerwick and saw, well, was made aware of the district heating system that was there. And that was what struck me at that time, is people were really bought into the district heating system. They told you about it. They were actually really quite proud of the fact that they had that system. So I totally get the point that people would feel a bit concerned. Gordon Lyndhurst also mentioned, interestingly, cost and to look at how we do cost. And yesterday I had a social enterprise contact me because there is a district heating system in Dunfermline that's run from the Wellwood tip, and it heats the Carnegie Leisure Centre, it heats the multi-storey flats, but interestingly it also heats Tesco and a social enterprise next to it. And I was contacted yesterday by the social enterprise who told me that Fife Council have 3 different levels, tariffs, rates for the different providers, and so Tesco is on a much cheaper tariff than the social enterprise. Now, that's something I'm going to pick up, but it was only yesterday that I really became aware of that. So cost is important. These things have to be affordable. And,
Mr Rowley, don't worry about the time. There's time in hand, so
okay.
You can take longer if you need it.
Thank you. And that's an important point. I also note that in terms of the progress the government's making in terms of community ownership of renewable energies, I think it's 70% of the target was achieved by 2020. And so we are behind, and there's a lot of work to be done there around community ownership. But community ownership of district heating systems is also, I think, an important way forward, and we need to look at how we can support. I do take on board the point that Alistair Burnett made about having the expertise and the knowledge for this type of system. I always remember that when I was leader of Fife Council, we put in X amount of millions of pounds to erect so many wind turbines across Fife, where we could then get the payback from them and inject that into the community. And it didn't quite come off, and I believe one of the reasons for that was that we did not have that level of expertise within the local authority. We had not accessed and been able to buy in that level of expertise. So there will take time. If we want to reach where Denmark's at, it will take time, but you've got to start someplace. And if we can build up that expertise, then I think it would be important. In terms of fuel poverty, it's always struck me a number of years ago, Presiding Officer, I was out campaigning in Paisley and on the doors there and got talking to this lady, and she had just moved into a new housing association house. And the key point that she made to me was that the house that she'd been in previously, which was also a social landlord, but it was damp, it was costing a fortune, they couldn't afford to heat the house. But most importantly, during the winter months in particular, her daughter was never away from the hospital, suffering from chest complaints and asthma. And when she moved into her new house, the lady told me not once had the daughter had to actually attend hospital. And so fuel poverty comes in many forms, and it's absolutely appalling, the levels of fuel poverty that we have, but it also impacts on health, it impacts on education, it impacts on every part of families' lives who are living in fuel poverty, and that's why we have to tackle fuel poverty. So I'm quite excited by this progress that has been made. I hope I'm back in the next Parliament, but I certainly look forward to the next Parliament doing the work, taking this forward further, so that once and for all we can tackle fuel poverty, but we can also invest in training, skills and jobs. And that's what we need to see coming through this new green agenda. It has to be jobs. I can understand why, and I've raised it with the Minister before, why the trade unions are sceptical. So we have to deliver, and we have to deliver jobs. And the potential for Scotland is then endless. We can do so much. So I'm pleased to finish, Presiding Officer, that there is unity in this Parliament to drive this agenda forward. That's a good start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. I now call on Graham Simpson to close the Conservatives. Mr Simpson, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by apologising to you for briefly leaving the chamber during this debate? I'm sorry about that. But it's been a very good debate, and I think Alex Rowley has summed up why this is so important, because he spoke eloquently, I thought, about fuel poverty, and he mentioned a three-tier tariff scheme in Dunfermline. Both of those are issues that this bill tackles. So on fuel poverty, clearly, if we have more district heating schemes, we can potentially drive the cost of heating down. I say potentially because it's not a given. It's not automatic, and that will be one of the tests of this bill. A couple of tests. Will it lead to greater use of district heating, and will it lead to greater take-up? And I think the answer is we actually don't know the answer to that. And will consumers be better protected as a result? And I think the jury's out on that as well, because that is really, really important. If you are tied in to a district heating scheme, what happens, and I raised this, and a number of members have raised this through the process, what happens if you don't like it, you want to switch supplier, as those of us who aren't on a district heating scheme can do pretty much any time. There are difficulties with that. What happens if the company supplying the district heating scheme goes bust or just decides it doesn't want to do it anymore? And that's when we come down to the question raised by Alexander Burnett of the supplier of last resort. Mr. Burnett said what's in the bill is not ideal at the moment. I don't think it is. I think these are still questions to be asked. Now, the Minister, I have also got to praise the Minister for his approach. I don't want to embarrass him too much, but it has actually, I'd have to say, it has been something of a masterclass in cross-party cooperation, driven by this Minister. He's managed to get people virtually round the table and agreeing on pretty much everything, and he was doing so well until that last group of amendments when Mr. Whiteman just decided he couldn't have it all his own way. But anyway, well done to the Minister, really, really well done, because as you've heard, Deputy Presiding Officer, there is cross-party consensus around this. It really is important. The Minister started off by telling us what a heat network is. You may assume people know, but it's a network that delivers heat, obviously, most commonly hot water or steam from a central source. So that's what it does. And there are a number of ways of doing that. We've heard various examples, actually, at stage 1, stage 2, and this stage as well today. Really good examples right across the country of where this is happening already. But we want to see it expanding, and people have mentioned the Danish experience. Heat networks, as we've heard already, cover about 50% of Danish heat consumption and 2/3 of households, representing 17% of national energy consumption. As Sarah Boyack said, we've got a long, long way to go. I didn't realise Sarah Boyack had been a minister as long as 20 years ago. She certainly doesn't look it, does she? No. But if we've not made progress in 20 years, I'm praising everyone today. If we've not made progress in 20 years, then that's not a good record, Deputy Presiding Officer. So I think I'll end it there. A number of things still to be tackled. The citizens' advice issue, what to do when people get turned off a network. But we are certainly fully behind this, as are all the parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call the much praised Mr Wheelhouse to close on behalf of the Government. Minister, you can have 10 minutes if you wish.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thank all members for today's debate and indeed their contributions in getting the bill to this point. I'll try and cover as many of the points that have been raised just to provide clarity as I can to those members who've raised issues in the open debate. To Alexander Burnett, in terms of the issues he rightly raises around the importance to heat network customers, the role of Ofgem, I'll come on to that in sort of more formal remarks just about the engagement with UK ministers on that point. But he mentioned, importantly, existing schemes and whether and the importance of them being covered by the legislation. Just want to put on record, certainly recognise the bill creates a large number of delegated powers that he referred to. This does reflect the fact the bill is regulating a market from scratch, which I know he appreciates at that point. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee scrutinised the bill on 11th of August and have had further opportunity to scrutinise the amendments that we've put forward, Stage 2 and Stage 3 collectively, and I believe they are comfortable with the use of delegated powers within the bill and have only raised, I think, one particular question with us, which has been addressed, I hope. Certainly in terms of the giving as much sight to Parliament early around legislation as it comes forward, we'll try and do that. We've not had draft orders ready to present to committee during the passage of the bill, but I can confirm that we will be ready to consult on the regulations later this year and to get moving on that. And we will, of course, continue to use the experience and knowledge of our Heat Networks Regulation Working Group and others as the regulations are developed. So I hope that is helpful to members. In terms of the points that Sarah Boyack raised about non-domestic rates, certainly I'm grateful to her for the engagement she's had in terms of looking at this through other legislation. We have introduced a district heating relief, which provides a discount of up to 50% on rates bills for premises used for district heating. That relief is unique to Scotland. It's not offered anywhere else currently in the UK, and it does provide, to provide certainty, we will bring forward regulations this year which will extend that relief out to 2032. We've also committed to laying regulations that would see a 90% relief for renewable heat networks, as well as those running from waste heat or energy from waste, which is mentioned by a number of members, which will begin from the 1st of April. That's, again, incentivising clean heat networks prior to the implementation of this bill. And the Business Growth Accelerator, which applies across a number of different types of business, already provides 100% relief for new build premises for up to 12 months after the first occupied. That does count for heat networks as well, and guarantees no rates increase for 12 months on building improvements. So therefore, a district heating scheme built after the 1st of April of 2018 can already claim 100% relief for the first year and then 50% relief thereafter. And we're obviously looking to implement the other change I mentioned in terms of regulations to implement a 90% relief. So hopefully that does help Sarah Boyack in terms of the points she has raised. Alec Rowley, I think, in very many fair comments he made today around the importance of this for the economy, and I'm particularly struck by the points he made there around the importance of good quality warm homes for people in their health and their education. We know how debilitating a cold home can be for people's health and well-being, and he's right to raise that. In terms of the important point he raised, which I know has been raised by Claudia Beamish, who cannot be here today as well, around the supply chain opportunities, I'd just like to say there are clearly, I agree with them, there are clearly economic opportunities that he is right to raise. For example, in 2020, the Heat Networks Industry Council found that heat networks sector could, on a UK-wide basis, grow to support between 20,000 to 35,000 new direct jobs by 2050, obviously additional indirect and induced jobs in the economy, and investment of up to 50 billion into the market by the same year. So clearly Scotland would like to see a large share of that, and I think because we're moving quickly on the legislation here, we're giving ourselves the best possible chance to have an early sighted pipeline and an early opportunity to capitalise on the job opportunities that come from that, whether it's in manufacturing equipment or indeed the installation and maintenance of heat networks. The other point I think he raised around skills, it's obviously clearly an issue which is already on the radar. Skills Development Scotland, the Green Jobs Academy and the Energy Skills Alliance are all looking at the potential for heat network development to stimulate the job opportunities, particularly for young people, but also in the context of a just transition to help those moving out of other industries like oil and gas into new opportunities, and I hope that is welcome. And he rightly raises the role of the trade unions, and I certainly give an undertaking that from the government's perspective we want to work closely with trade unions to make sure that we seize the opportunities as they arise. I want to thank Alec Rowley and indeed Mark Ruskell for the very kind words around the Bill team, who have done a sterling piece of work, and I know other colleagues have mentioned that too. I think Mark Ruskell raised important points around transition in terms of technology and looking at opportunities in the context of the energy quadrilemma at the use of hydrogen. That's certainly something that we are already actively thinking around. And I certainly give him an undertaking that we will be looking wherever we can do to maximise the opportunities and look for those low-hanging fruit and the win-wins that he described as well. And Willie Coffey rightly raised Denmark. It gives me an opportunity to thank the Danish Government for their very solid support to the Scottish Government in giving us the benefit of their experience, as did colleagues in Norway. And it's something we can learn from as to how Denmark did implement heat networks and then switch the heat engines themselves to lower carbon alternatives as they went along. We're going to have to short-circuit that process and move straight to low carbon and zero carbon heating systems. But we can also learn from how that proved to be less painful for consumers in the past. And I thank Willie Coffey for raising some very good examples in his local constituency, such as the example in Galston that he referred to. In terms of just the time that's left remaining to me, Presiding Officer, I would like to just cover the next steps. It seems that we now have arrived at a point where the Heat Networks Bill is now in a form that has broad support and consensus amongst members. That will, I hope, ensure that we are able to, in time, look forward to the work that lies ahead of us, as Alec Rowley was projecting. There is the process of turning a legal framework created by this bill into a fully functioning regulatory system. That will require a series of implementing regulations that will shape precisely how each element of this system will work in practice. The licensing, consenting, permitting, zoning and so forth. And I think I want to thank Mark Ruskell for recognising that we have gone about as far as we probably can without going to the Delegated Powers Committee to take that work forward. The bill contains a large number of delegated powers, so I know we must be realistic in our expectations that as far as timing is concerned, I would anticipate a new system being in place by 2023. But we are already working towards implementation. Obviously, the introduction of a delivery plan through amendment at stage 2, I think, is a welcome development, and that will drive forward that work, and we aim to have that in place by April of 2022. And I would expect the first of a number of detailed consultations to take place later this year on the regulations themselves, as I said earlier. The way we move forward will, I believe, continue to be collaborative. Today is a good indication of that. We intend to relaunch our stakeholder working group to maintain close cooperation with the heat networks and housing sectors. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all those involved with the working group for the fantastic input they've had to helping inform the technical detail of what is a technical bill. The UK Government has announced its intention to introduce consumer standards to heat networks market, and that goes a long way to addressing some of the issues that have been raised by colleagues today. But I would briefly like to update Parliament on our collaboration on that front. Lord Callanan, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, wrote to me last week in reply to my earlier correspondence, reaffirming the UK Government's commitment to working with Scottish ministers and Scottish Government officials in terms of the development of the UK Government's primary legislation, which would introduce consumer standards to apply across the Great Britain area. I welcome that commitment, which is necessary, not necessarily for the same reasons that Gordon Lyndhurst did, but I do welcome that nonetheless. And we also want to ensure that we have the powers to appoint the Consumer Standards Body for Scotland. It's still our intention to appoint Ofgem, which has been praised today by a number of members. And in doing so, it and the licensing body created by this bill can be one and the same, reducing cost and confusion for consumers and the industry alike. And it should not be forgotten, Ofgem already have a team 300 strong in Glasgow, providing excellent service in terms of electricity and gas markets. And there's obviously opportunities for looking across different energy sources and for dual billing, dual fuel billing, for example, between heat networks and electricity in due course. Presiding Officer, the nature of heat networks means that local authorities will be vital if we are to make these systems work in practice, and we will be inviting local government representatives to work in partnership with us to help ensure that we end up with processes and regulations that are manageable and affordable for everyone. We have worked with Parliament to augment the role of local authorities in the regulatory system. I'm enormously grateful for the enthusiastic and constructive role played by the members in this chamber, and particularly the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, in getting the bill to this point in as strong a shape as it is. This, I believe, has shown Parliament in its best light, and hope the rest of the work that needs to be done will benefit from the same spirit of cooperation and consensus, as many of the regulations flowing from the bill will be subject to the affirmative procedure, and Parliament will have direct oversight of much of this. So I look forward to seeing, like Alec Rowley, I hope I'm here to see this after the election, and the case to see the bill fully implemented in due course. There are targets now embedded in the bill. They are undoubtedly challenging. They require the equivalent of approximately 650,000 domestic premises to be connected to heat networks by 2030. with just over 32,000 connected today. That shows the scale of the task ahead of us. The bill will be fundamental to this, but will not act alone. And the 2020-21 programme for government committed they will invest £1.6 billion over the next 5 years to get things rolling. And a recent estimate indicated the total cost to transform our homes and buildings is likely to be in excess of £33 billion across all sectors. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll bring my remarks to a conclusion. Certainly, Presiding Officer, in closing, I'd like to thank members once again for their contributions to the debate today and throughout the passage of this bill over the past 11 months, and to thank my exceptional bill team for all they have done. I hope the bill is something all members feel they can get behind, be proud of, and they will vote in favour of the bill this evening. So I urge them all to support the Heat Network Scotland bill, and I'm proud to have moved the motion in my name. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. And that concludes the debate on the Heat Network Scotland bill, and we'll shortly move on to the next item of business.
Thank you, colleagues. Given that we've reached the end of scheduled business, I'm minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 11.2.4 of Standing Orders that decision time be brought forward to now. Could I invite Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move such a motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The question is that decision time be moved till now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. So there's only one question this evening. The question is that motion 2419... sorry. No, we'll go into suspension. The question is that motion 24192 in the name of... No, sorry, I'm going to stop there. I'm conscious that members have already voted and have accessed the voting app. However, there may be some members who have not done so. So before I put the question on the bill, and we will have to vote because it's legislation, I'm going to suspend just for a few moments, just to make sure that the few members who may not have already accessed the voting app are able to do so. So I'm going to suspend for a few moments. Okay, colleagues, thank you. We're now back in session and we're going to move straight to the vote. The question is that motion 24192 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse on the Heat Networks Scotland Bill at stage 3 be agreed. And members may cast their votes now. This is a 1-minute division. That vote is now closed. If members would alert me if they had any difficulty in voting. I think I've got a couple of members online, but just let me know if there's a point of order. Can I call Rachel Hamilton to make a point of order, please?
Presiding officer, I would have voted yes.
Thank you very much, Ms Hamilton. I'll make sure that vote is added. You voted yes for the bill. Thank you. Can I call Claire Baker to make a point of order?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Apologies, I couldn't connect and I would have voted yes.
Thank you very much, Ms Baker. You would have voted yes. I'll make sure that's also added to the voting register. And Keith Brown, point of order.
I couldn't vote, Presiding Officer. I would have voted yes.
Thank you very much, Mr Brown. I'll make sure your vote...
Yep.
Thank you. I'll make sure your vote of yes is added to the list. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. The result of the vote on motion 24192 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse is yes 119. There were no votes against, there were no abstentions. The motion is agreed and the Heat Networks Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you very much, colleagues. That concludes decision time. We'll be shortly followed by members' business, but those members who do have to leave, please make sure you follow the one-way systems, wear your masks and follow all the social distancing rules around the building. Thank you. A short pause while we change seats.